How are y'all doing? I said, how you doing? That's what I'm talking about. That's the energy I need today. So, my name is Sherman. Welcome to the Body Art presentation for Onyx Band. And I have the honor and privilege of being their collaborator. Amazing group of middle schoolers. And I just have a few quick housekeeping notes before we get into our presentation. In case we need to exit due to an emergency, there's an exit right around the corner here. There's one straight through those doors and down the stairs. There's not one through those doors. That goes to the balcony, so don't go that way. If you need to use the restroom, please wait until a presenter is done with their presentation before you get up. There's also a restroom right around here, around this corner, and another one through those doors on the opposite side. We are going to have a brief intermission about halfway through the presentation. It's a bit of a long one, so we'll do a little stretch break halfway through. And after each presenter, we'll have a time for you to ask maybe 3 or 4 questions. So please use that as an opportunity to find out more about their creative process or ask any clarifying questions. If we don't have time to answer your question, try to remember it for Expo Night. You can ask them then. We might also have time for a little bit of a meet and greet in our green room, aka the Onyx Band space, after all the presentations, if you want to catch up with any of the presenters then. All right, just want to say a few words before inviting the first presenters up to stage. This morning, we are going to do our best to tell you about the process of creating our body art project. And on Thursday, you'll get to see the final products. But even with these 2 large community-facing events, you won't really get to see the full picture of what goes on and what goes into this work. On the screen here, you can see Brightworks' 5 core values. I want you to repeat them after me. Meaningful engagement.
Meaningful engagement.
Trust.
Trust.
Equity and justice.
Equity and justice.
Community.
Community.
Curiosity.
Curiosity.
Thanks. These are the pillars that really hold us up, and it's what keeps us going too. So whether it's your first time giving a presentation or your 10th, I don't know. Completing a Brightworks project isn't easy. The amount of thought and care that goes into all of this really can't be measured. The presenters that you're about to hear from are some of the hardest working people I've worked with. I've learned so much from them, and I guarantee you that you'll all leave this room today having learned something new. But I think what I'm most proud of is this culture we've created in our band where these 5 core values come as naturally to us as breathing. So please give it up for the Onyx Band. And now let's welcome to the stage our first presenters, Berkeley and Iona.
Hi, I'm Berkeley. And I'm Iona. So let's get started. We both have a love for podcasts and wanted to do one of our own. And body art seemed like an okay art to do a podcast on. But it would be hard to do a podcast by ourselves. So we decided to work together. Now, we needed to figure out what we wanted to do our podcast about. And there were just so many different options. Long story short, one of us had the idea of doing one about beauty standards. We both liked the sound of it, and that's how we came up with our project idea. A podcast about beauty standards. Now that we had the idea in our little heads, we went to work on our declaration. We got approved. After the declarations, we started with sending out a survey asking people what they were most interested in hearing about. In the end, we came up with 5 big categories. The first episode would be called Body. In Body, we would talk about fat phobia, pretty privilege, and sexualizing women for men.
The second episode would be Trends,
In terms, we would talk about social media, makeup, and fashion. The third would be gender. In gender, we would talk about how gender plays into beauty standards and beauty standards within the queer community. The fourth would be body modifications. In body modifications, we would talk about makeup, tattoos, plastic surgery, and piercings. And finally, the fifth, self-care. In self-care, we would talk about dieting, self-care, and exercising. Well, that was our original plan, and what was we going to cover for each episode? Here's what actually happened. We ended up spending too much time on research, and we didn't get to record until week 4, which frankly was too late. And so here's how it plays out. After we decided on the episodes, my mom told us that she knew a drag queen that was willing to be interviewed. His name is Cacophony Daniels, if you've ever heard of him. He's currently playing Tinkerbell in the New York Peter Pan Panto. We had a great interview with him. He was very talkative, but also very helpful. Around now is when we spent entirely a week on just research. I think we were a little overambitious with all the topics we wanted to cover, but we still learned a lot. I did a lot of my research on pretty privilege. One of the most interesting things I learned was about this guy named Jeremy Meeks. Jeremy Meeks is a convicted felon for firearm charges. When he and 3 other men were arrested, the police department posted his mugshot on their Facebook page. It went viral the next day. Also, BuzzFeed recognized his mugshot as a meme the same day. He was sentenced to 27 months in prison. 13 months later, he got a modeling contract while still in jail. A year later, he was on the New York Fashion Week. So basically, he got out of jail because people considered him hot and helped bail him out. And I did a lot of my research on fat phobia. One of the most interesting things I learned was a report from Common Sense Media in 2015 found that over half of girls and 1/3 of boys, as young as 6 to 8, said the ideal weight was thinner than they are right now. By age 7, 1 in 4 kids had attempted some type of dieting behavior. And by age 10, 80% of girls had attempted some type of dieting behavior. Going back to the story, after research, I got sick for 4 days. While Berkeley was sick, I figured out how to get this transcript from Cacophony Daniels. When I came back, I got Iona sick, which was really a horrible idea of mine. While she was sick, I interviewed people around Brightworks, asking their opinion on beauty standards. When I came back the next day, we interviewed an esthetician named Gunilla Eisenberg. She was the founder of ISA Alex Skincare in San Francisco, and she was very lovely and helpful. The next week, I edited the audio we got, and I worked on this presentation. With the time we had left, we decided that we would change it to, or it was best to change it to 2 20-ish minute episodes, and having the theme of each episode broader. Currently, we have 2 fully edited episodes with a theme of body, but also covering skincare, and a fully recorded second episode about gender, but only half edited. Lastly, we want to thank some people who helped us along the way with our project. Rob and Sam for approving our decoration, but especially Sam because he helped us with all our technological difficulties and gave us the mics to record. Sherman for unlocking the building we needed to record in, and overall just helping as a collaborator. And thank you to our experts for setting aside time to let us interview them. Also, thanks to everyone who filled out our many forms. And to our friends and family for all our support. Any questions?
Do you see podcasting in your future?
I really liked podcasting. Editing is really hard, but I definitely like to record more audio stuff. I would agree.
What were your interviews about?
With Cacophony Daniels, it was kind of about beauty standards in the queer community and kind of struggles with gender and how that plays into beauty standards. And with Ganilla, it was just a lot about skincare and like the beauty industry.
Will your podcast be available on public sites?
That's undecided. You can definitely listen to it at Expo, but we're still unsure if we'll put it on YouTube or anything. Arjun?
In your opinion, what was the most challenging part and what was the most rewarding part?
For me, the most challenging part was definitely editing. It took a lot longer than I expected. It was pretty tedious. The most rewarding part was like probably doing our interviews and like getting all the recordings we needed.
For me, it was like trying to get the mics to work was frustrating, and all the research was really rewarding.
Yeah, sorry. You have you?
In,
One more?
in terms of everything you learned through your research and your interviews, what are some of the things that surprised you the most or stand out the most in terms of gender, beauty standards?
Yeah, I think for me it was what I shared with the 80% of girls, and that thing I didn't know that it was that high, and that was really surprising to me, for sure.
Yeah, same with the thing I shared with the pretty privilege.
But next up, someone who also has a project related to mental health, Truman.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Truman, and my body art project is to design a tiny house that supports my body and mind. Going back to body art, I knew I wanted to make a physical project, one that I could build with my hands and not just on a screen. I started my project by doing some brainstorming and came up with a good list of ideas. I settled on architecture and mental health, a little inspiration from Lord of the Rings Hobbit books. I decided to build my house into a hill that blends perfectly into the land and scenery and makes me feel closer to nature. There are some problems, however, of building into a hill. Hills are circular, well, somewhat circular, and not square like normal houses, or rectangles. And building into a hill makes windows really hard. To overcome these problems, I decided to make my house an octagon shaped to maximize the usable floor space, the circular hill, and there are no side windows. I placed 8 skylights that bring light into the space. Yee. I designed the house with 3 rooms. There's a bedroom that is the darkest place of the house. There's a bathroom that offers privacy. And there's a main room for cooking, eating, and talking with other people. I put a fireplace in the center of the house, which evenly heats all 3 rooms and provides a comfortable and calming atmosphere in every room. Whoops. For my first iteration, I made 2 large architectural drawings of the house. For my second iteration, I made a version of the house out of cardboard. I added the walls in the correct positions. And for my third and final iteration, I made the house out of foam board and covered it with paper mache. I managed my time by oscillating between the physical project and my presentation. Is that right? Yep. Through my research, I learned that color can positively impact mental health, such as the color orange, which can provoke feelings of courage, confidence, energy, playfulness, vibrance, social interaction. Whereas the color gray provokes feelings of reliability, security, solidity, modernist, futuristicness, sleekness, and gracefulness. The color purple can provoke feelings of royalty, nobility, majesty, luxury, creativity, and abundance. The Amangiri is a hotel in the Painted Desert of Utah. When I visited, I was struck by the open design and brutalist beauty of the buildings that blended perfectly in their surroundings. The feeling of the Amangiri is one of secure peace and tranquility. The walls are made of concrete mixed with desert sand. The Palmer House is a rental house owned by my grandparents in Michigan. It was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and I visit it almost every year. It is a beautiful modern house made of mostly wood and is set into a forest. There isn't a single right angle along the horizontal plane in the entire building. The Lord of the Rings Hobbit holes are a popular tourist destination in New Zealand. I visited it on a trip and was amazed by attention to detail. A comfortable little village of hobbit holes, complete with a mill, bridge, and bar, had a feeling of serenity and closeness to the land. In my final iteration, I added elements of each of the houses I just described to you, and added the features that Amangary's smooth and clean walls, the Palmer House's idea of beds and tables fitting into the angles of the house, and the hobbit hole's idea of having a comfortable home under the earth. I'm most proud of finishing the mini house on time. One of the biggest challenges was daily documentation. I overcame this challenge by practicing. If I had more time, I would improve my project by painting it. One thing I learned about myself was that I enjoy completing projects, not just starting them. In the future, I would like to continue making physical projects. At Expo, I'd like people to look at my architectural model of my underground mini house and imagine living in it. Thank you to Siobhan for giving me really good feedback and asking the right questions. James, for Dare, for brainstorming and coming up with ideas. Onyx Band for being awesome and encouraging me. Thanks, y'all. And y'all for staying with me through my presentation. Yes.
At Expo, how are you planning for people to get a sense of, is there gonna be a roof on your house?
There's going to be a roof that can be detached, so you can see inside and see all the little house things I added.
Where is this house set? Where would it ideally be?
Well, at the place, you're saying making it?
No, I mean if this house was life-size and real and you could ideally live in it, where would it be?
It could be really anywhere in a forested or unforested region. Mainly, it's meant to be a place that's not near normal houses, because you won't want it looks really good against a forested or just plains backdrop. Thanks.
About how big is the final model?
Well, it was 20 by 20, or maybe more 20 by 20, 25 by 25 inches. And 1 inch is 1 foot in my thing, so just in the village. Sam?
Did you design your house with a certain number of inhabitants in mind? Is it for one person, 2 people, a family?
Generally 1 person. It's in the mini house category, and so that's what those houses are generally designed for. Yes?
Where did you put food in?
Well, there's a fridge. Whoops. If I can find my picture of it. Yeah. So in here, the fridge will probably be around in this corner.
Okay, would there be a stove?
Yep, stove top is right next to it. There's a really big counter that sweeps along this edge. No questions? Introducing Juniper!
Hello, I'm Juniper, and I'm going to tell you a bit about my project, representing mental illness through art. But first, a quick disclaimer. For this presentation, I'm going to be using the term mental illness to describe a large variety of conditions. But as a neurotypical person, though I've been working to research and get permission to use this term, I apologize in advance if I prefer a different term, and that's totally valid. Okay, let's get into it. In case you didn't know, there are a ton of people who experience mental illness in our world. In fact, 1 in 5 Americans experiences a mental illness every year. And chances are that you or someone you know has experienced a mental illness. So considering so many people face this challenge on a daily basis, how come there are so many untrue stereotypes and misconceptions circling our society? This is the question I wanted answers to, as well as helping find a solution. For this project, I would make 3 art pieces that represented 3 different mental illnesses: ADHD, OCD, and schizophrenia. I chose these mental illnesses for a couple different reasons. Both ADHD and OCD are conditions that people in the school have, and it was really important to me that I get to talk to people who had the conditions so that I could get a better understanding of what it's like to have. And for schizophrenia, honestly, it just fascinates me. And knowing it has a pretty bad representation, I wanted to get a more true understanding of it. My plan was to make mixed media pieces that included collage, blackout poetry, and other forms of writing, painting, penwork, and paper cutouts. I would obviously be learning about ADHD, OCD, and schizophrenia, but I would also research a more general history of mental illness treatments and how our society romanticizes mental illness. For my first iteration, I sent out a survey to our community, specifically reaching out to those with mental illness or a kind of neurodivergence. And this is when I asked folks questions about their experiences with their mental health, and scheduled interviews with people who were comfortable with that. It is also during my first iteration that I did some more general research on different kinds of mental illness and chose ADHD, OCD, and schizophrenia. I then moved on to my second iteration, when I interviewed 6 Brightworks students about their experiences, as well as 2 outside experts, who were Mark Leary, a professor of psychiatry who also happens to be Grace's dad, and Tracy McGillis, a therapist who specializes in ADHD in adults. It is also during my second iteration that I spent a lot of time researching, probably more time than I should have, as I always do. I learned a lot about really disturbing history while researching. Like, one of the more famous historic ways of curing people with mental illness was to perform a lobotomy, which is a practice where a surgeon would use a sharp stick called a leucotome to jab open someone's brain, often through their nose or eye, and blindly attempt to split the prefrontal cortex and frontal lobe. This was widely seen as a cure, even got a Nobel Prize once. But when you cut all connection between prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobe, it could very well get rid of someone's symptoms, just also get rid of their personality and their memory. So, not great. A more recent example of mental illness treatment was in the 70s when metrazole therapy was popular. Metrazole therapy was a medication taken multiple times each week that caused intentional seizures, but the practice often caused injury due to severe convulsions. On the other hand, I did also learn some more lighthearted stuff. Did you know that, though it hasn't been confirmed whether this was the intent or not, there's a common theory that the characters in Winnie the Pooh represent different mental illnesses, traits of mental illness, or neurodivergence? Pooh would be impulsivity, Piglet is anxiety, Roo is autism, Kanga is social anxiety, Owl is dyslexia, Tigger is ADHD, Rabbit is OCD, and Eeyore is depression. So, after all this researching, both through interviews and online sources, I put this information together to make 3 sketches representing the mental illnesses with feedback here and there from peers. With a combination of finished sketches and research, I was set up well to complete my 3rd iteration. I had all the right information, a solid plan, and then 1 week into my 3rd iteration, working hard on the art piece backgrounds, I got sick. And not just a teeny bit sick, I was out for a week with little work getting done. I was getting more stressed and more stressed by the day, so on top of feeling horrible physically, I was also starting to struggle mentally. So, when I got back to school last week, I had a lot to work on balancing project work and also going a bit easier on myself knowing I was still sick and had missed a whole entire week. I'm now at a point in my 3rd iteration where, though I'm quite stressed, I will finish. So, yay! And this project has also had many fun parts. I really enjoyed this project's research. I got to do collage, one of my newly found favorite mediums, and I got to use a typewriter for the first time, which has been a little dream of mine for a long time. And I got to learn about a large group of people who were mistreated and misunderstood to try and help at least our community understand. So, I would like to thank my bandmates and friends for giving me feedback, Shervan for helping me so much and just being a really supportive collaborator, and my outside experts, as well as Rich, Manisa, and my mom for helping me find them, and especially all my fellow Brightworks students who let me interview them, because my project would be so much more uninformed without y'all. Lastly, thanks to you for listening, and I'd love to see you at Expo. Any questions? Yes.
As you were going through your own stress at the very end, was there anything that you had learned from your research that you felt yourself drawing on in order to kind of get yourself through that situation?
Yeah. I would say that it is definitely ironic that I started really struggling mentally while doing a project about mental health. But most of what I was researching was mostly just focused on the mental illnesses, so not quite. But yeah. B?
What is the scale of the paintings that you have?
They are, I think, 1 foot by 1 foot. Noah?
What, I know that you mentioned OCD and
Mentioned what?
you mentioned OCD and ADHD. What was the other one? And
Schizophrenia is typically seen as more of a severe mental illness where you have hallucinations and most often auditory hallucinations, as well as just kind of generally warping your reality. So you might start believing things that are untrue for no particular reason. So it's kind of can vary. That's the gist. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite of the 3 to draw, or?
They're not finished, but I would say currently my favorite is the one I made for ADHD. Okay, so next we have Saran.
So I did not go into this art with the idea of doing a project or giving a presentation, but I think it's always a good idea to try to put myself in the students' shoes whenever I can. And since I was already working on a personal project and doing some independent research on a topic that had some connections to the ARC, some of the Onyx banders encouraged me to turn it into an ARC project. So here we go. My project is called Coolie Women. A couple of months ago, I started reading this book by Gayatri Bahadur called Coolie Woman. This book chronicles her search for answers about her ancestors who labored on sugarcane plantations in Guyana. Coolie is a derogatory term used by Europeans to refer to indentured laborers from India. It comes from a Tamil word meaning worker. To give you a very brief history, after the abolition of slavery in the British Empire in the early 1800s, indentured laborers were brought from India to fill the labor void in places like Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, and Jamaica in the Caribbean, as well as Fiji and Mauritius. Little is known about the origins of many of these people. Although indenture was supposedly voluntary, with a promise of freedom after a certain number of years of plantation labor, Bahadur's research finds that many people were tricked into making the journey from India to the Caribbean. When a worker's contract expired, they were usually left without the means to get back to their homeland if they wanted to. Almost 1 million Indian laborers were brought to the Caribbean between 1838 and 1915. Women made up a very small percentage of people shipped to the Caribbean, and many of them were children or widows trying to escape unsafe or abusive conditions at home. A lot of you already know I'm from Trinidad, and I've always been interested in the history and culture of Trinidad and Tobago. During the exploration phase of the body arc, many Onyx banders were interested in learning about their ancestry. This made me think about the dichotomy within my own family history. On the European side, my ancestry can be traced back several centuries with remarkable accuracy. Yet, on the Indian side, I only know the names of my grandparents and can trace it back no further. This curiosity led me to pick up Bahadur's book, which in turn inspired me to start an art project. I wanted to use my art to honor these women, educate others, and learn more about my heritage and ancestors. For this project, I wanted to create a series of hand-drawn charcoal portraits. I searched online for the source images that were referenced in Bahadur's book. In the Victorian era, British people exoticized Indian girls and women, and photographs and postcards of them were very popular. Yet these women were never named. The postcards were simply labeled coolie type or coolie girl. So I wanted to reverse this dehumanizing practice by breathing some life into these images. After making 4 charcoal portraits, I would make a portrait of my grandmother. And I'm currently working on a portrait of my cousin's step-grandmother, who was one of the last people in our village to remember what life was like for the last generation of indentured workers. As I said, I didn't go into this art planning on doing a project. Helping the Onyx banders with their projects was a big enough task by itself. So I work on one portrait at a time whenever I had a free moment, before or after school or during a break. I use charcoal pencils and a blending stump on cardstock, studying reference images closely to get the shading right. Fellow artists in the band gave me some very valuable feedback and advice on my work, and I placed each finished portrait in a simple matte frame, and I'll put those in some glass frames for expo night. Overall, I'm proud of the way my pieces turned out. I love doing portraits, but this is the first time I've worked on multiple pieces that fit together so closely visually and thematically. I found that making these portraits was also an intensely emotional experience. As I looked into the eyes of the subjects, both in the reference images and in my drawings, it felt an unexpected connection with each person. As I was drawing, I was also communicating with them in a way. And I'd find myself asking them who they were, what were they thinking when they sat for that portrait, what were they trying to escape when they left India, how did they endure the brutality of indentured servitude, what gave them the strength to keep going each day, what were their dreams for the future. This is my grandmother, Itoria. Her parents were indentured laborers. And although she was born a few years after the indentured service system was supposed to have ended, her lived experience was similar to theirs. By age 7, she was an orphan. By age 8, she was a child bride. When she grew up, she farmed the land that was allotted to her, growing rice and sugarcane and tending to livestock. She became the matriarch of a large family, raised 7 children and dozens of grandchildren. She raised them the only way that she knew how, following traditional Hindu customs that were brought from India and passing her knowledge of farming onto them. She had bigger dreams for my father and made the really difficult decision to sell her livestock in order to pay for the boat ticket for him to travel to England to go to university. And it was there that my parents met, so without my grandmother's forethought and sacrifice, I wouldn't be here. When people look at my portraits, I want them to know about the legacy of indenture and the effect it continues to have on people today. I want them to recognize the humanity of the people in those portraits and to seek out their stories like I did, because we all have stories that need to be heard. And here's my grandmother again, holding me, her youngest grandchild, at our home in Trinidad. I'd like to thank my bandmates for giving me feedback on my artwork, and just for encouraging me to turn my art into a body art project. I'd like to give gratitude to my ancestors for the strength that they continue to give me. Whenever I feel discouraged or feel like something's too difficult, I just remember all the challenges they had to overcome, and it helps me keep things in perspective. So I'd like to dedicate this project to them and to the countless others today who have been displaced from their homelands. Any questions?
I was wondering, are your pieces titled?
not titled them. That's a good question. Linnea.
Where do you plan on taking this after Expo? Do you want to continue it? Is there more to do with this, or do you want to take this to a new project perhaps, or?
I might do a couple more. I'm going to keep some for myself and perhaps give some others to some family members.
As you were doing these portraits, I'm curious, how did you make decisions about what you include? You know, you see sometimes European portraits where things are put in as symbols, even the clothes that people are wearing, the things that they're, you know, that they are around them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I tried to keep it fairly accurate to the images that I was working from, because I feel like there was a reason why they were dressed the way they were, and I didn't want to take too many liberties with that. Elijah.
You mentioned your friend's step-grandmother, who is one of the people that still remembers the indentured servitude and that system and the way of life. But I'm curious, were you able to talk to her, interview her, or maybe?
She's not alive anymore. Yes.
I noticed resemblance in the way you look and connection to them. Did you notice that when you were drawing, that you had resemblance?
A little bit, especially looking in my grandma's eyes when I was drawing that, definitely noticed that. Yeah. All right, thanks everyone. Can you give Sebby just an extra loud round of applause? This young man has missed over a week of school, and he's coming up here for the first time in a long time. Let's just give it up for Sebby.
Okay, so my project is called Roots and Branches, A Journey Through My Inheritance, and it's basically about, as the name suggests, family trees and like just inheritance and genetics. So one of the main reasons for starting this project was because of the countries I already knew I was related to, such as Greece or Armenia. And I knew these probably weren't the only countries that I was related to, and I was curious to see what other countries I could find. And also another reason was before starting this project, I didn't know too much about my family tree. I knew my parents and grandparents, but other than that, I didn't know much, so I was curious on finding out more about that. So, simply put, the two main things I wanted to make were a complex family tree that extended at least 7 generations back, and an essay where I try to explain and figure out what my ethnicity is, and then I talk about why it's important. So through this project, I wanted to be able to answer questions such as how specific ancestors of different generations impact my inheritance. When my ancestors were born and when they died, and how to use public records to find information about specific ancestors. And as I work through this project, I'd be able to figure out the answers to all those questions and more. So for my first iteration, I used a website called Ancestry.com. I'm not sure if any of you know what it is, but it's basically a website where it gives you all of these records about people who may or may not be related to you, and you'd have to use clues you got from your living family to figure out whether they were actually accurate. And then I put all of them down on a virtual family tree. And it was supposed to be both from my dad's side of the family and my mom's side of the family. But since my mom was from Romania, and for a while Romania had like a period of communism, I wasn't able to find out much about that. So I ended up being more on my dad's side. So for my second iteration, I was going to make a physical diagram of my entire family tree. That's what I had planned. But it turned out like making a diagram of all of it was way too big for the size I was going for, so I ended up just doing like a certain branch of my family tree. And I don't know if this counts as a third iteration, but after that I just make an essay. It was going to be just me trying to figure out what my ethnicity is, but halfway through the project, my mom found this test I took from 23andMe that told me exactly what my complete inheritance is. So I decided to make the essay mostly about like, which side did each of those parts come from, and like, how did they come into my family? And some of the ways I worked through this project were bringing my work home after school and working on it over the weekends and evenings. And I got a lot of help from my parents and grandparents, and who like told me useful information about their relatives that they knew of. So a few things I learned while doing this project. So you may think like if your parents have a certain set of genetics, you're gonna have those genetics, but in fact you only get like a random half of each of your parents' genetics, and that includes their ethnicity. And each, like, it goes on and on, like your grandparents, you'd only inherit about a quarter, and so on until like eventually at like 7 generations back, like a specific ancestor would give you less than 1% of your ethnicity. And one of the things that surprised me was I knew that part of my heritage would be from Europe and probably from the Middle East too. But the fact that part of me is African, even though it's like a very small percent, was very surprising to me. And it's ironic because some of my ancestors I found in my family tree were very clearly at least somewhat racist. So it's kind of ironic. And so some of the things I was proud of, I plan to extend my family tree at least 7 generasions back. But in some places, I was able to extend it back to the 1500s and record ancestors who lived all the way back then, which I really didn't expect to get that far. And because of that DNA test that I got, I was able to make my essay way more in-depth than I planned it to be, which was good. And I'm glad that despite all that, I was able to finish every part of the project before it was due. So the biggest challenge was making my diagram because it just took me way longer than I expected to just put all of it together and write it all down. And even at one point, I think someone was like drawing on it, so I had to restart the entire thing. But I overcame it because, like I said, I kept bringing it home and working on it evenings and during weekends, so that helped a lot. So things I learned about myself were obviously my ethnicity, and which gave me like a good insight about like my physical traits and why they came up, and also my homework capacity, because I've been working a lot at home, and it gave me like a good estimate of how much I was able to do in like one day, which was like maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours at most. And something I'd like to do in the future to expand this project would be to try to expand my family tree on my mom's side. I know it's possible. It would just be much more complicated, and I couldn't have been able to do it during this project, so I'd like to attempt to do that in the future. And something I'd like people to take away at Expo Night, I'm gonna talk about this a bit in my essay, but I'd like people to learn about like the importance of knowing your heritage. And okay. Gratitudes, like I said, I'd like to thank my parents and grandparents for giving me all the information. And also, I'd like to thank Shirvan and June for giving me like useful tips and criticisms of the work I had so far. And that's it.
How has the art project you've done, how have you experienced it as important for your understanding of yourself?
Yeah, I think it just gave me like a much better connection to my past, and that was like really neat, and I was able to figure out like what my family went through, which basically just gave me a better appreciation for where I am now. So
cool. Thank you.
Anyone else?
You taught me something and I want to thank you. My sister and I did the DNA testing and we both had different results for our ancestry and we couldn't figure out why. And your slide answered it on how we randomly got different genes from both parents. And I had no idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. There's no other questions. I guess it's great.
Thanks for being a great audience so far. We're at our intermission point. We're going to take a little body break, so I'd like to invite my hype man up to the stage so you can get a little break in here. Come on up.
I'm big on specific people that stand up. There. Standing up. Move. Just walk around in a circle. I don't know. Who else? Truman's mom. Truman's mom, stand up. Come on. Person over there on the phone. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. You gotta stand up and run the circle. Or just stand up. I'm calling people to stand up. Come on. Alright. Tasso, I see you. Tasso, stand up. Come on, buddy. Mar, stop hiding. Stop hiding, Mar. Stand up, come on.